All right, I want to go over here. I want to go over the anatomy, the microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle, right? So to go over microscopic anatomy of a skeletal muscle, we have to first kind of start at a more macroscopic level, right? So we're going to start at a more gross level, and then we're going to work our way down to more cellular and more subcellular microscopic structures that will help us understand the anatomy of the muscle and the muscle fiber, right? So just for orientation here, what I have zoomed in on here is a bone, right? So you can see a bone here. This could be the femur. You could this is the femur here, but you could substitute any other bone in its place, right? So just general here, bone. We have tendon, and then we have muscle here, right? So just for orientation, kind of this region here. Now, whenever we look at a muscle, we know that a muscle itself is an organ, right? So a muscle itself, it's made of different types of tissues. You have the muscle tissue itself, but you also have nerves and you have blood vessels. You have all these other tissues that are helping to make an actual muscle an organ, right? So the outer layer or the outer covering of a muscle is something called the epimysium, right? And you can see this here. This epimysium is this kind of dense, irregular connective tissue structure that wraps all the way around. You can read about it here in this description here, but it's covering all the way around the muscle itself and encasing it, and then that is really continuous here with this tendon, right? Now, a muscle, a skeletal muscle in this instance, is made up of something called fascicles, right? Muscle fascicles. And so if I zoom out here, if I kind of move down, within this muscle, you can see all these kind of circular regions here, and I'll highlight them here in blue. These are your muscle fascicles, right? Muscle fascicles. These fascicles are circularly arranged. They are composed of individual muscle fibers, right? And so you can see one here that is pulled out. This one here is one that has been pulled out. This specifically is the covering around it. But this whole thing that you can see here has been pulled out of the muscle. This whole thing, this big group, and again, all these in blue, these are muscle fascicles, right? Muscle fascicles. Surrounding an individual fascicle is something called perimysium, right? So initially outer, we had the epimysium, and then surrounding it, you have the perimysium surrounding the individual muscle fascicles, right? A fascicle is just a group of muscle cells, a group of muscle fibers. So think of it like a pencil, right? So think you have one pencil, that one pencil is one muscle fiber. And then you bunch together a bunch of other pencils, right? You get 10 or 15 or 20 more pencils and you group those together with a rubber band or something. That big group of pencils, that is the equivalent of a fascicle. And each individual pencil is equivalent to an individual muscle fiber, right? And so you can see here, if we continue out here, you see all of these individual muscle fibers, right? So each one of these individual circular structures here, these long fibrous structures, each one of these is a muscle fiber, and you can see blood vessels in it running throughout. You can see some other cells called, you can see the nuclei that are dispersed throughout. There'd be other cells distributed throughout here, lots of other organelles that we'll get to in just a moment. But this whole group here, is a muscle fascicle. If we continue down, you can see one individual structure pulled out, right? So this long structure that has been pulled out here, kind of coming towards you on the screen, that is an individual muscle fiber, right? An individual muscle fiber. Now, surrounding the muscle fiber, you have something called the endomysium. So around the muscle, you had the epimysium. Around the fascicle, you had the perimysium, and then you have the endomysium around the individual muscle fiber, right? Now, deep to this endomysium, you have another covering. You have this other kind of wrapping around a muscle, which is called the sarcolemma, right? So this is our sarcolemma. The sarcolemma is essentially the plasma membrane, or it is the plasma membrane of our muscle fiber, right, of our muscle cell. Now you'll notice here, and I can kind of zoom in on some of these, you see these little kind of circular regions, right? You can see some of them right here, these circular little depressions in the sarcolemma. These are called transverse tubules, and if I click on them, see if it'll allow me. These are the transverse tubules, right? These kind of little small circular depressions that you see in blue, right? T tubules or transverse tubules. What these are areas where the sarcolemma, which again, the sarcolemma is this blue plasma membrane of the muscle fiber. These T tubules are where the sarcolemma invaginates and dives down deeper into the muscle fiber, right? Into the muscle fiber. So this green region here that you see here that I've highlighted in blue, this is a T tubule, but the sarcolemma in this area has been kind of stripped away and has been cut away and removed, right? So you can see that. Now, you also notice once you go deep to this sarcolemma, you go deep, you see these other circular structural objects, right? These other circular structures. These are now within a muscle fiber, and these are called myofibrils, right? Myofibrils. This one long thing here is called a myofibril. The myofibril is organized into these structures called sarcomeres, right? So that's what you see here on the screen. This large circular structure highlighted in blue is a myofibril, but the individual units that make it up are called sarcomeres, right? So the sarcomere is the structural and functional unit of striated muscle tissue, which includes skeletal muscle and cardiac muscle as well. Both of those are considered striated muscle tissue. Now, surrounding these myofibrils, right? So making up the muscle fiber are these myofibrils, and surrounding the myofibrils, you'll see this kind of blue lace-like structure here that you see in the middle of the screen. And this is something called the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So all of this tissue that you see here, this is the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The sarcoplasmic reticulum, or sometimes it's called the SR, is essentially a modified smooth endoplasmic reticulum that you find within this skeletal muscle in this example, right? Now, importantly, what does the sarcoplasmic reticulum do? It stores and it houses calcium, right? That is extremely important. It is a storage location, a storage site for intracellular calcium inside the muscle fiber, right? And for reasons apart from what we'll talk about in this video, when you talk about the actual physiology of the muscle contraction, that calcium is absolutely essential for muscle contraction, but it's stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum, right? So you'll also notice kind of one last thing here I'll point out are when you zoom in on these myofibrils, right? When you zoom in on these myofibrils, you'll notice here that there are these lines. And you'll notice just for a second before I continue, the individual muscle fiber has lots of myofibrils. So each one of these circular structures is a myofibril making up an entire muscle fiber, right? So each one of these circular things is not a muscle fiber. The whole thing is a muscle fiber made up of these myofibrils, right? Now you'll notice here that they have these yellow and kind of dark gray, yellow and kind of dark structures, right? These are what are called myofilaments. Right, myofilaments. And you'll notice here in one of the myofibrils, these myofilaments have been pulled out, right? So you kind of see them here in yellow, and you see them in this reddish color as well. So these myofilaments make up the myofibrils. And again, the myofibrils make up the muscle fiber. The muscle fiber is organized into fascicles, and the fascicles make up the muscle itself, right? So these myofilaments, there's several of them, but these two main ones are called actin and myosin, right? Actin and myosin. This yellow one, this is the myosin. So if we click on it here, this is our myosin. It's also sometimes called the thick filament, right? Because it is physically larger, it is physically thicker than the actin. So if the myosin is the thick filament, you can probably guess what the actin is called. It's called the thin filament, right? The thin filament. Now, on the surface of actin, there are some additional structures. There are some additional myofilaments called troponin and tropomyosin, which are regulatory myofilaments, whereas the actin and the myosin are contractile myofilaments, meaning these are what are actually producing the muscle contraction. So whenever you contract your muscle, you contract your diaphragm to breathe, you contract the muscles in your hands and fingers to produce movement so you can type on a keyboard. When you contract the muscles in your legs so you can walk and jump, it's happening at this level of the actin and myosin, which help to make up the sarcomere, right? And that we'll separate videos, separate discussions on the actual structure of the sarcomere, but it's made up of this actin and myosin along with a few other structures, right? So if I just zoom out here, you can kind of appreciate the whole thing that we have talked about. If I zoom all the way out, you can kind of see this gross view of everything that we looked at. So again, we started way over here with our bone, tendon, and muscle, right? This muscle was organized into individual fascicles that you see here in blue. You have one fascicle here pulled all the way out, and you have the endomysium surrounding a muscle fiber. You have the sarcolemma, which is, again, just the plasma membrane around the muscle fiber. You have all these individual myofibrils in the muscle fiber that contain these sarcomeres. And again, the sarcomeres contain this myosin and this actin, along with a few other regulatory myofilaments, right? So this is just a kind of an overview of the microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle, so heart muscle, would be similar because it's also striated, and then smooth muscle would be a little bit different because it is non-striated, hence the name smooth, right? So please reach out if you have any questions, and